Jonathan Drake was a man who had it all, or so everyone thought. He was the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the world, with a net worth that made headlines every time he sneezed. But behind the polished suits and flashy cars, Jonathan carried a weight no one could see. His life wasn't picture perfect, far from it. He lived in a sprawling mansion filled with expensive furniture, yet there was an emptiness inside him that money couldn't fix. The reason? His son, Ethan. At just 8 years old, Ethan was his entire world. The little boy had autism, and while Jonathan loved him more than anything, raising him alone was harder than running a billion-dollar company. It wasn't easy to balance work meetings, boardroom presentations, and caring for a child who needed constant attention. And then there were the nights when Ethan would wake up scared or restless, needing someone by his side. Those moments reminded Jonathan how lonely their lives had become since his wife passed away years ago. Over the years, Jonathan had hired countless caregivers to help take care of Ethan. Some came highly recommended, others seemed promising at first glance, but none stayed long enough to make a real difference. One left because she couldn't handle Ethan's meltdowns. Another quit after only 2 weeks, claiming the job was too stressful. Then there was the one who got fired after Jonathan caught her scrolling through social media, instead of paying attention to Ethan. Each failure left Jonathan feeling more defeated, like he'd never find someone who truly understood his son. But one day, something changed. While going through stacks of applications for yet another caregiver position, Jonathan stumbled upon one that stood out. The cover letter wasn't fancy, it was simple, heartfelt, and written by someone named Emily Carter. She didn't boast about her qualifications or throw around big words to impress him. Instead, she talked about her passion for helping children on the autism spectrum. She shared stories about kids she'd worked with during internships, describing how she'd helped them communicate better and feel less afraid of the world around them. Her words struck a chord deep within Jonathan. For the first time in months, maybe even years, he felt a glimmer of hope. After interviewing her over video call, Jonathan knew he'd found someone special. Emily was young, just out of nursing school, but her eyes sparkled with determination. She spoke softly, almost shyly, but her confidence grew as she explained her approach to working with children like Ethan. She believed in patience, creativity, and most importantly, treating each child as an individual rather than a diagnosis. By the end of the conversation, Jonathan didn't hesitate. He offered her the job right away. Emily moved into the Drake estate shortly after, bringing with her a suitcase full of clothes and a bag of art supplies she said might come in handy. From the moment she arrived, it was clear she wasn't like the others. She didn't rush things or expect instant results. Instead, she took her time getting to know Ethan, observing how he interacted with his toys, how he reacted to certain sounds, and what made him smile. Slowly but surely, she began introducing small changes to his routine. She brought music into his playtime, letting him bang on drums or strum guitar strings. She encouraged him to draw pictures, telling him they were beautiful even if they looked like random scribbles to anyone else. Most importantly, she listened not just to Ethan but to Jonathan too. She asked questions, sought advice, and showed genuine interest in understanding their family dynamics. For the first time in ages, Jonathan started seeing glimpses of happiness in Ethan's eyes again. The boy laughed more often, clapped his hands excitedly when Emily joined him in silly games, and even attempted to say a few new words. Watching this transformation unfold gave Jonathan a sense of relief he hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, Emily was exactly what they needed. Still, despite the progress, there was something nagging at the back of Jonathan's mind. Something about the house felt off, too quiet sometimes, too perfect. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Little did he know, his own actions were setting the stage for secrets that would soon unravel everything. You see, Jonathan wasn't just a grieving father trying to do right by his son. Beneath his calm exterior lay a man haunted by past betrayals. After losing thousands of dollars to a previous caregiver who stole from him, Jonathan had taken drastic measures to protect his family. Hidden cameras were installed throughout the mansion, tiny devices tucked away in corners where no one would notice. To Jonathan, they were a necessary precaution. What harm could come from keeping an extra set of eyes on things? At first, the footage reassured him. He saw Emily patiently guiding Ethan through activities, singing songs to calm him down during tantrums, and staying late into the night to clean up after messy art projects. Everything seemed fine, better than fine actually. But as days turned into weeks, tiny details began catching his attention. Late-night visits to Ethan's room without any alarms going off. Hushed phone calls in the hallway, packages arriving. At the house addressed to Emily. These weren't major red flags, but they were enough to plant seeds of doubt in Jonathan's mind. Was Emily really as perfect as she appeared? Or was she hiding something beneath her kind smile and gentle demeanor? As much as Jonathan wanted to trust her, he couldn't ignore the niggling voice in his head warning him not to let his guard down too soon. And so, amidst the joy of seeing Ethan thrive and the growing bond between himself and Emily, tension simmered beneath the surface. Neither of them realized how close they were to discovering truths that would test their fragile relationship and change their lives forever. As weeks went by, Emily settled deeper into the rhythm of life at the Drake household. She wasn't just a caregiver anymore. She had become part of the family in ways Jonathan hadn't anticipated. Every morning, she greeted Ethan with a warm smile and an activity planned to spark his curiosity. Whether it was painting with bright colors, building towers out of blocks, or playing soft melodies on a keyboard, Emily found creative ways to connect with him. Slowly but surely, Ethan began opening up in ways Jonathan hadn't seen before. Ethan's progress amazed everyone around him. For years, he'd struggled to express himself verbally, often retreating into silence when overwhelmed. But now, under Emily's care, he started speaking more clearly. He could say good morning without hesitation and even managed to ask for things he wanted, like juice or his favorite stuffed animal. One evening, Jonathan walked into the living room to find Ethan giggling uncontrollably as Emily tickled him during a game of peekaboo. The sound of his son's laughter hit Jonathan like a wave. It was something he hadn't heard enough of since his wife passed away. But it wasn't just Ethan who was changing. Jonathan noticed shifts within himself too. Before Emily came along, he'd been so consumed by work and guilt that he barely knew how to be present for his son. Now watching Emily interact with Ethan inspired him to try harder. She encouraged him to join their activities, to sit on the floor with them while they built puzzles or sang silly songs together. At first, Jonathan felt awkward, unsure if he was doing things right. But Emily reassured him with a kind smile, reminding him that being there was what mattered most. For the first time in years, Jonathan started attending therapy sessions alongside Ethan. It wasn't easy, sitting in those quiet rooms, listening to therapists talk about emotions he'd buried deep inside. But Emily's unwavering optimism kept him going. She believed in Ethan's potential, and somehow, her belief rubbed off on Jonathan. He began seeing his son not as someone defined by challenges, but as a bright, curious boy full of possibilities. Despite all this progress, however, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right about the house. There were moments when she swore she heard faint clicking sounds coming from corners of the rooms, where nothing should have been making noise. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of tiny lenses embedded in inconspicuous places, a bookshelf here, a lamp there. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, thinking maybe the estate just had advanced security systems installed for safety reasons. But as time went on, the unease grew stronger. Late one night, unable to sleep, Emily decided to check on Ethan. She tiptoed down the hallway toward his bedroom, careful not to wake Jonathan, who was likely still working in his home office. As she passed by a mirror hanging on the wall, something caught her eye, a small red light blinking faintly nearby. Her stomach dropped. She turned slowly and spotted a tiny camera tucked behind a decorative vase on a side table. Her heart raced as realization dawned on her. The house was wired with hidden cameras. The next morning, Emily confronted Jonathan. Standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed, she demanded answers. "Why are there cameras everywhere?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "Do you really think I'd do something wrong? Do you trust me at all?" Jonathan froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips. He hadn't expected this conversation so soon. Or ever. Setting the mug down, he sighed heavily and admitted the truth. "I'm sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. "After what happened with the last caregiver, I couldn't risk anything happening to Ethan. I thought it would help me feel safer." Emily stared at him, her cheeks flushed with frustration. "You don't get it, do you? Trust isn't about spying on people. If you can't trust me, then why did you hire me in the first place?" Her words stung, but Jonathan knew she was right. He had let fear cloud his judgment, and now he was paying the price. Desperate to fix things, he promised to remove the cameras immediately if she stayed. After a long pause, Emily reluctantly agreed. For Ethan's sake. She couldn't walk away from the little boy who had come to mean so much to her. Though the cameras were taken down, tension lingered between them. Neither fully trusted the other yet, and both carried the weight of unresolved feelings. Jonathan tried to make amends by spending more time with Emily and Ethan, hoping to rebuild the bond they'd started forming. They shared meals together, laughed over Ethan's antics, and even took short trips to the park. On the surface, things seemed better, but beneath the smiles and laughter, doubts still lingered. One afternoon, while helping Ethan draw pictures of animals, Emily noticed Jonathan watching them from across the room. His expression was unreadable, part admiration, part suspicion. It made her wonder if he'd ever truly let go of his mistrust, and Jonathan, for his part, couldn't stop, replaying the footage he'd reviewed late at night, the late-night visits, the whispered phone calls, the mysterious packages. No matter how hard he tried to focus on the positives, those unanswered questions gnawed at him. Little did either of them know, their fragile peace was about to be shattered. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, Emily had secrets of her own, secrets that would soon come to light and force them both to confront truths neither was prepared for. Tensions in the Drake household continued to simmer, even after Jonathan removed the hidden cameras. The air between him and Emily was thick with unspoken words. On the surface, things seemed to return to normal, or as normal as they could be, but beneath the calm facade, both of them were carrying burdens they didn't know how to share. Emily threw herself into her work with Ethan, determined to prove that she deserved Jonathan's trust. She introduced new activities to keep Ethan engaged, like planting flowers in the backyard or baking simple recipes in the kitchen. These hands-on tasks not only helped Ethan develop motor skills, but also brought a sense of joy to their days. Watching Ethan proudly present his masterpiece cookies to his dad made Jonathan smile despite the lingering doubts in his mind. For those fleeting moments, everything felt okay again. But Jonathan couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something wasn't adding up. He replayed memories of the camera footage over and over in his head, the late-night trips to Ethan's room, the hushed phone conversations, the packages arriving at odd hours. It gnawed at him, keeping him awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. One night, unable to resist, he quietly logged into his security system to review old recordings one last time. As he fast-forwarded through clips, something caught his eye, a shadow moving near the guest house. The guest house. That part of the property had been unused for months, yet there it was, someone sneaking inside under the cover of darkness. Jonathan's heart pounded as he zoomed in on the figure. It wasn't Emily, it was someone else entirely. Who could it be? And why were they using his estate without permission? Determined to get answers, Jonathan decided to dig deeper into Emily's past. Using resources from his company, he hired a private investigator to look into her background. What they uncovered shocked him. Emily had briefly worked at a facility accused of mistreating patients before abruptly leaving. Online forums buzzed with rumors linking her to unethical practices, though nothing concrete had ever surfaced. Reading these reports sent chills down Jonathan's spine. Could Emily have been involved in something shady? Was she hiding more than just phone calls and packages? Despite the unsettling findings, Jonathan hesitated to confront her immediately. He wanted proof, not speculation. But the seed of suspicion had already taken root, poisoning his thoughts. Every glance Emily gave him now seemed calculating, every interaction tinged with doubt. Meanwhile, Emily remained oblivious to Jonathan's investigation. She was too busy trying to rebuild the fragile trust between them, unaware that her own secrets were about to collide with his growing paranoia. One evening, while putting Ethan to bed, Emily noticed something unusual. A piece of paper slipped under her bedroom door. Curious, she picked it up and unfolded it. The note was short and cryptic. "You need to leave. Now." Her stomach churned as fear gripped her. Who would send such a message? And why? Before she could process what was happening, another strange event occurred. The next morning, Emily found Ethan's favorite toy missing from the playroom. When she asked Jonathan if he'd seen it, he shrugged and said no. Later that day, the toy mysteriously reappeared on the dining table with no explanation. These incidents left Emily feeling uneasy, as though someone or something was messing with her. Her unease reached its peak when she discovered a small backpack stuffed with cash hidden behind some cleaning supplies in the utility closet. Panic surged through her veins. Whose money was this? Why was it here? Questions swirled in her mind, but she knew better than to jump to conclusions. Instead, she decided to wait and observe carefully, hoping to uncover the truth herself. Meanwhile, Jonathan grew bolder in his quest for clarity. Late one night, he followed the shadowy figure he'd seen on the footage toward the guest house. His pulse raced as he approached the door, unsure of what, or who, he might find inside. Pushing it open cautiously, he stepped into the dimly lit space. The smell of stale air hit him first, followed by the faint sound of movement coming from the back room. Heart pounding, Jonathan moved forward until he saw a figure rummaging through a bag. Before he could react, the intruder turned around and Jonathan froze. It was a young man barely out of his teens with shaggy hair and wide, panicked eyes. "Who are you?" Jonathan demanded, his voice sharp with authority. The boy stammered, clearly caught off guard. I'm sorry, please don't call the cops." Jonathan pressed further, demanding answers. Finally, the truth spilled out. The boy was Emily's younger brother. He had been staying in the guest house secretly, surviving off scraps and sneaking around to avoid detection. Desperate for money to fuel his gambling addiction, he'd been stealing small items from the house to sell. Worse still, he admitted to taking cash directly from Jonathan's accounts, using Emily's access to siphon funds unnoticed. Furious and betrayed, Jonathan stormed back to the main house to confront Emily. Bursting into the living room where she sat reading with Ethan, he thrust the evidence in front of her. "Care to explain this?" he snapped, his voice trembling with anger. Emily's face went pale as she looked at the documents and photos Jonathan shoved toward her. Tears welled up in her eyes as realization dawned. "Michael," she whispered, shaking her head. Oh no. She quickly pieced together what must have happened. Her brother had always been reckless, constantly borrowing or stealing money to feed his destructive habits. She thought she'd cut ties with him completely after moving to the Drake estate, but apparently, he'd found a way to exploit her position for his gain. "I swear I didn't know," Emily pleaded, her voice breaking. "If I had any idea he was doing this, I would have stopped him. You have to believe me." For a moment, Jonathan wavered. There was genuine pain in Emily's eyes, a raw vulnerability that made it hard to dismiss her outright. But the betrayal still stung. How could she not have noticed her own brother lurking around the property? How could she claim ignorance when his actions had jeopardized everything? Ethan, sensing the tension, clung to Emily's arm, looking up at her with wide, frightened eyes. Seeing his son so scared snapped Jonathan out of his fury. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to calm down. "Get him out of here," he said finally, his tone firm but quieter now. "And we'll deal with this later." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face as she rushed outside to confront her brother. By the time she returned, Michael was gone, chased away by her angry shouts and threats to involve the police if he ever came near the estate again. Exhausted and emotionally drained, Emily collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Jonathan watched her silently, torn between anger and pity. He wanted to scream, to demand accountability for the chaos her family had caused. But seeing her broken like this reminded him of his own struggles. The loneliness, the desperation, the constant battle to protect Ethan at all costs. Maybe, just maybe, he understood her pain more than he cared to admit. As the night wore on, neither of them spoke much. The weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over the progress they'd made together. Trust, once fragile, now felt shattered beyond repair. Yet deep down, both Jonathan and Emily knew they weren't done fighting, not for Ethan, and perhaps not for each other either. The days that followed the revelation about Emily's brother were tense and heavy. The atmosphere in the Drake household felt like a storm cloud hanging low, ready to burst at any moment. Jonathan tried to focus on work, burying himself in spreadsheets and meetings to distract from the chaos at home. But no matter how hard he pushed it aside, the situation gnawed at him. He couldn't stop replaying the confrontation with Emily in his mind, the hurt in her eyes, the tears streaming down her face, Ethan clinging to her as if afraid she'd disappear. Emily, on the other hand, threw herself into caring for Ethan more than ever before. She seemed determined to prove that her intentions had always been pure, even if her judgment when it came to her family was flawed. Every morning she greeted Ethan with a smile so bright it almost hid the cracks beneath the surface. She organized painting sessions, outdoor games, and music lessons, all designed to keep Ethan happy and engaged. And while Ethan responded well to her efforts, laughing and playing like nothing had changed, Jonathan found himself watching her closely, searching for signs of deceit or ulterior motives. But the harder he looked, the less sense it made. Emily wasn't acting guilty. She was acting heartbroken. Her shoulders sagged slightly when she thought no one was looking, and there were moments when she'd pause mid-sentence, staring off into space as though lost in thought. It was clear she was carrying the weight of what had happened. Not just the betrayal by her brother, but also the damage it had done to her relationship with Jonathan. One evening after tucking Ethan into bed, Jonathan approached Emily in the living room. She was sitting on the couch flipping through a photo album filled with pictures of Ethan's recent milestones. His first full sentence, his artwork displayed proudly on the fridge, the day he rode a bike without training wheels for the first time. Seeing her so absorbed in those memories softened something inside Jonathan. For the first time since discovering Michael's thefts, he sat beside her instead of across from her. "I've been thinking," Jonathan began, his voice hesitant, "about everything that's happened." Emily stiffened, closing the photo album slowly. She braced herself for another round of accusations, but Jonathan surprised her by continuing in a gentler tone. "You didn't know about your brother, did you?" he asked, meeting her gaze directly. Emily shook her head, her eyes filling with tears again. "No, I swear I didn't. If I had known, I would have stopped him. I wouldn't let anyone hurt Ethan, or you. You have to believe me." Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I want to believe you. I really do. But this whole thing, it's made me realize how much I don't know about you, about your life before you came here." Emily nodded, understanding where he was coming from. "I get it," she said softly. "And I'm sorry. I should have told you about my brother, even if I thought he was out of my life for good. I shouldn't have kept quiet." Her honesty caught Jonathan off guard. He'd expected defensiveness, maybe even anger, but not this raw vulnerability. It reminded him of the night they'd argued over the hidden cameras, how she'd called him out on his lack of trust, forcing him to confront his own flaws. Now, here she was doing the same thing, owning up to her mistakes without making excuses. "I messed up," Emily continued, her voice trembling, "but I love Ethan. And I care about you too. Whatever happens next, please don't take that away from me." Her words struck a chord deep within Jonathan. He realized then that he wasn't the only one struggling with guilt and regret. Emily carried her own burdens, her complicated family, her past mistakes, the pressure of proving herself in a world that often judged her harshly. In many ways, she was fighting the same battles he was, just on a different front. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to improve between them. Jonathan stopped scrutinizing Emily's every move and started trusting her again, little by little. He noticed how hard she worked to rebuild what had been broken, not just with him, but with Ethan too. One afternoon, while reviewing security footage from the estate, which he'd reluctantly reinstalled after Michael's intrusion, he saw something that took his breath away. It was Emily, late at night, sitting by Ethan's bedside as he slept. She wasn't checking on him because of an alarm or a noise. He was perfectly fine. Instead, she was simply watching him, her expression soft and tender, as if memorizing every detail of his peaceful face. That single moment melted whatever lingering doubts Jonathan still harbored. He realized then that Emily wasn't perfect. No, one was. But she was genuine. Her love for Ethan wasn't fake, and neither was her desire to help their family heal. However, just as things seemed to be settling back into place, fate decided to throw another curveball. During a routine audit of his company's finances, Jonathan stumbled upon discrepancies linked to anonymous donations made to autism charities. At first, he dismissed it as a clerical error, but curiosity got the better of him. Tracing the funds led him straight to Emily. When he confronted her about it, she didn't deny it. Instead, she admitted to siphoning small amounts of money from his accounts, not for personal gain, but to support causes close to her heart. She explained that she'd grown up seeing families struggle to afford therapies and resources for their children on the spectrum, knowing firsthand how expensive and inaccessible those services could be. She wanted to give back in whatever way she could. "I never meant to steal," she said, her voice breaking. I wanted to help people who needed it. People like Ethan, like us." Jonathan listened silently, torn between admiration and frustration. On one hand, he respected her passion and selflessness. On the other, he couldn't ignore the fact that she'd crossed a line, one he hadn't given her permission to cross. For the second time in months, they found themselves at a crossroads. Jonathan wrestled with what to do next. Firing Emily would devastate Ethan, who had come to rely on her completely. But letting her stay felt like condoning dishonesty, something he couldn't reconcile with his principles. In the end, Jonathan made a decision that surprised even himself. He fired Emily, but not without offering her a chance to make amends. He told her that if she truly cared about helping families like theirs, she could channel her energy into starting a foundation dedicated to supporting children with autism. And he promised to fund it personally, provided she agreed to step away from their household for now. Emily accepted his offer, though it broke her heart to leave Ethan behind. As she packed her bags, she left a letter for Jonathan explaining her gratitude for the opportunity to work with Ethan, and her hope that Jonathan would continue fighting for his son's future. Her departure left a void in the Drake household, one that neither father nor son knew how to fill. But as Jonathan read her letter late that night, sitting alone in his study, he realized something important. Redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about learning from them. Both he and Emily had faltered, but they'd also shown resilience, compassion, and a willingness to grow. Maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over yet. Months had passed since Emily left the Drake household, but her absence lingered like a shadow over the mansion. Life without her was quieter, emptier, and far more challenging than Jonathan had anticipated. Ethan, who had once thrived under her care, began to withdraw again. The progress they'd celebrated, the laughter, the words, the confidence, started slipping away. Meals became silent affairs, with Ethan pushing food around his plate instead of eating it. His favorite toys gathered dust in the corner, untouched for days on end. Jonathan tried everything to fill the gap Emily had left behind. He hired new caregivers, each promising to bring the same warmth and dedication she had shown, but none of them clicked with Ethan the way Emily had. One quit after a week, overwhelmed by Ethan's meltdowns. Another stuck around longer but clearly lacked the patience needed to connect with him. Each failure left Jonathan feeling more defeated, as though he were failing his son all over again. At night, when the house was quiet and Ethan was asleep, Jonathan often found himself staring at the photo album Emily had left behind. It was filled with snapshots of happier times. Ethan laughing during a bubble bath, proudly holding up a painting he'd made, or sitting cross-legged on the floor playing with blocks. Flipping through those pages brought back memories of how joyful their home had been with Emily in it. Her presence hadn't just helped Ethan, it had reminded Jonathan what it meant to truly be present for his son. But guilt gnawed at him too. Had he acted too harshly? Could he have handled things differently? These questions haunted him, replaying in his mind like a broken record. Deep down, he knew firing Emily had been the right decision at the time. He couldn't overlook the fact that she'd taken money without permission. But now, seeing the toll it had taken on Ethan, he wondered if he'd made a mistake letting her go completely. One evening, while scrolling through old emails, Jonathan stumbled upon a note Emily had sent shortly after leaving. In it, she thanked him for giving her the chance to work with Ethan and expressed her hope that he would continue advocating for his son's future. Reading her words reignited something inside Jonathan, a mix of gratitude and regret that pushed him to take action. The next morning, he decided to track her down. Using connections from his company, he discovered that Emily was working at a community center for children with special needs. When he arrived at the modest building tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, his heart raced with anticipation. Would she even want to see him after everything that had happened? Through the glass doors, Jonathan spotted Emily immediately. She was kneeling beside a group of kids, helping them string beads onto colorful threads. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and there was paint smudged on her hands, but she looked exactly the same as he remembered. Kind, patient, and full of life. For a moment he hesitated, unsure if this was the right move. But then, one of the children tugged on her sleeve, pointing toward the door where Jonathan stood. Their eyes met, and for a split second, neither said a word. Finally, Emily approached him, her expression guarded yet curious. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with caution. "I came to apologize," Jonathan replied, his tone sincere, "for everything." Emily blinked, caught off guard by his words. "Apologize? For what?" "For not trusting you enough," he admitted, lowering his gaze. "For letting my fear and anger blind me to the good you were doing. For Ethan. For me, for everyone. I was wrong and I'm sorry." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she absorbed his apology. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "It means a lot." Jonathan took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I also wanted to ask if you'd consider coming back. Not as Ethan's caregiver, but as a partner. Together, we can create something bigger than either of us could do alone." Emily frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He explained his idea, a foundation dedicated to supporting families affected by autism. With her passion and experience combined with his resources and influence, they could make a real difference. They could provide scholarships for therapies, organize support groups for parents, and fund research initiatives aimed at improving the lives of children like Ethan. As Jonathan spoke, Emily's face lit up with excitement. This was her dream, to help families navigate the challenges she'd seen firsthand growing up. And now, here was Jonathan offering her the chance to turn that dream into reality. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice firm with determination. "But only if you promise to trust me moving forward. No more secrets, no more hidden cameras, just honesty and teamwork." Jonathan nodded earnestly. "You have my word." With Emily back in their lives, albeit in a different capacity, things began to change for the better. Planning the foundation gave them both a renewed sense of purpose, and their collaboration brought an unexpected closeness. They spent hours brainstorming ideas, visiting schools and therapy centers and meeting with experts in the field. Through it all, Jonathan marveled at Emily's dedication and creativity. She had a way of seeing possibilities where others saw obstacles, and her optimism inspired him to think bigger than ever before. Ethan, too, benefited from their partnership. Though Emily no longer lived with them, she visited regularly, bringing activities and projects designed to engage him. Slowly but surely, his confidence returned. He started speaking more clearly, interacting with others, and even joined a music class where he learned to play simple tunes on a keyboard. Watching his son thrive once again filled Jonathan with pride and gratitude for the woman who had helped make it possible. But perhaps the most profound change was in Jonathan himself. Working alongside Emily taught him the value of forgiveness, not just for others but for himself. He realized that being a good father didn't mean never making mistakes. It meant learning from them and striving to be better every day. Emily's resilience showed him that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about using it to build a brighter future. As the months went by, the foundation grew into something remarkable. Families from across the country reached out, sharing stories of how its programs had transformed their lives. Donations poured in, allowing them to expand their reach and impact even more communities. At ribbon-cutting ceremonies and fundraising events, Jonathan and Emily stood side by side, united by a shared mission to create a world where no child or parent felt alone in their struggles. And through it all, Ethan remained at the heart of everything they did. His laughter echoed through the halls of the Foundation's headquarters, a reminder of why they'd started this journey in the first place. For Jonathan, Emily, and countless others touched by their work, it was proof that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. The Foundation quickly became more than just a project for Jonathan and Emily. It became a beacon of hope for families navigating the challenges of autism. What started as a small initiative grew into something far greater than either of them had imagined. Parents who once felt isolated found solace in support groups hosted by the Foundation. Children who struggled to communicate discovered new ways to express themselves through art, music, and play therapy programs funded by its scholarships. And communities that lacked resources for special needs education suddenly had access to tools and training they desperately needed. Jonathan watched with pride as stories of transformation poured in from all corners. A mother shared how her son, who used to scream uncontrollably in public, now felt comfortable enough to sit through an entire movie at the theater, thanks to sensory-friendly screenings organized by the Foundation. Another family wrote about how their daughter learned to ride a bike after months of occupational therapy sessions, made possible by financial aid. Each story was a testament to the power of collaboration, compassion, and perseverance. For Jonathan, these victories weren't just numbers on a report. They were reminders of why he'd embarked on this journey in the first place. Every child helped was like seeing Ethan's progress mirrored in someone else's life. It gave him a sense of fulfillment he'd never experienced before, even with all his business achievements. For so long, he'd defined success by wealth and status. But working alongside Emily taught him that true success came from making a difference in people's lives. Emily, too, found renewed purpose in the work they were doing together. She often reflected on how far she'd come since those early days at the Drake estate, how much she'd grown not only as a caregiver but as a person. The mistakes she'd made, the hidden phone calls, the stolen funds, had weighed heavily on her conscience, but she saw them now as lessons rather than failures. They had shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and more determined to do right by others. Her bond with Jonathan deepened over time, evolving into a partnership built on mutual respect and trust. Gone were the days of suspicion and doubt. Instead, they communicated openly, leaning on each other during tough decisions and celebrating victories big and small. Their shared mission brought them closer than either had expected, reminding them that healing wasn't just for Ethan or the families they served. It was also for themselves. Ethan remained at the center of it all, his bright spirit inspiring everyone around him. He loved visiting the Foundation's headquarters, where colorful murals adorned the walls and laughter filled the air. During one particularly memorable event, Ethan stood proudly beside Jonathan and Emily as they unveiled a new playground designed specifically for children with sensory sensitivities. As balloons floated into the sky and applause erupted, Ethan turned to his dad and said, "We did good, huh?" Jonathan knelt down to meet his son's gaze, his heart swelling with emotion. "Yes, buddy," he replied, his voice thick with pride. "We did really good." But the foundation's impact extended beyond tangible achievements. It created ripples of change that reached even the most unlikely places. One day, while reviewing applications for a scholarship program, Emily came across a letter written by a young man named Alex. In it, he described growing up with autism and struggling to find acceptance in a world that often misunderstood him. Thanks to the foundation's efforts, he'd been able to attend a summer camp tailored to his needs, a life-changing experience that gave him confidence and friendships he'd never thought possible. Reading Alex's words moved Emily to tears. She realized then that the foundation wasn't just helping individuals, it was reshaping attitudes, breaking down barriers, and fostering understanding within communities. It was proof that when people came together with a shared vision, anything was possible. As the years passed, Jonathan and Emily continued to dream bigger. They expanded the foundation's reach internationally, partnering with organizations abroad to bring resources to underserved regions. They launched campaigns to raise awareness about autism, challenging stereotypes, and encouraging inclusivity in schools and workplaces. And they never stopped listening to the families they served, ensuring that every decision reflected the needs and voices of those who mattered most. Through it all, Jonathan carried the lessons he'd learned along the way. He understood now that leadership wasn't about control, it was about trust, vulnerability, and humility. Firing Emily had been one of the hardest decisions he'd ever made, but it had ultimately led to something extraordinary. By choosing forgiveness over resentment, he'd opened the door to a future neither of them could have envisioned alone. And Emily? She carried her own lessons forward, using her past missteps as fuel for growth. Her brother Michael eventually sought help for his gambling addiction, reaching out to her after years of estrangement. Though rebuilding their relationship was difficult, Emily welcomed him back with open arms, believing in the possibility of redemption for herself, for him, and for anyone willing to try. In the end, their story wasn't just about overcoming betrayal or building a foundation. It was about finding light in the darkest moments, learning to forgive, and realizing that true strength lies in connection. Together, Jonathan and Emily proved that even the most broken pieces can be put back together to create something beautiful. One evening, as the sun set over the foundation's sprawling campus, Jonathan and Emily sat side by side on a bench overlooking the playground. Ethan ran ahead laughing as he chased bubbles blown by volunteers. The scene was peaceful, joyful, a reflection of everything they'd worked so hard to achieve. "You know," Jonathan said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I used to think happiness was something you achieved on your own, but now I see it's something you build with the people you care about." Emily smiled, nodding in agreement. "And sometimes it takes losing things to realize what truly matters." They sat there quietly watching Ethan play under the golden glow of twilight. For the first time in a long time, neither felt the need to say more. They didn't have to. Everything they needed to know was right there, in the laughter of a child, the warmth of friendship and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.